Listen to a conversation between two people.
Aren't you too old to be reading comic books?
This isn't just any comic book. It's a Walt Disney classic.
Walt Disney Classic or not, this is a university.
Don't be such a snob. I'll have you know that this is required reading for my American Popular Culture course.
I can't believe it. Here I am reading stacks of major works by important authors like Flaubert, Dickens, and Tolstoy for my Survey of 19th Century Literature course, and you're reading comic books.
Hey, this isn't the only required reading material in the course. We have to read a lot about the historical events that affected the comic book writers and study contemporary art movements and how women and minorities are depicted in the comics. And that's only one aspect of the course.
Why is the woman critical of the man's reading material? What does the man imply about his American Popular Culture course? What is one of the assignments the man has to do in the course? Listen to a conversation between a student and a university office staff member. They are discussing financial aid.
I'm afraid your student loan money won't be available for another 2 weeks because your application arrived a few days after the deadline.
2 weeks? Oh, no. Does that mean I might not get a loan?
No, but we had to wait until those applications that met the deadline were processed before we knew if there was going to be enough money for late applicants.
How will I complete my registration without my loan money? The registrar drops students if they don't pay their tuition fees by September 20th.
Students in your situation usually apply for an emergency loan. An emergency loan must be paid back within a month or a very high interest rate will be charged. As soon as you receive your student loan, you use it to pay back your emergency loan.
So, I need to take out an emergency loan to pay my tuition, and then when the student loan comes through, I pay back the emergency loan.
That's right. Emergency loans are usually granted on the same day you apply for them, so you could get one and complete your registration today. Here's the form. Be sure to sign it here and here. When you've finished filling it out, take it to Mr. Schultz in the office next door. He'll tell you what to do after that.
Thank you very much.
What is the student's problem? Why wasn't the student's loan ready? What can the student do in order to complete his registration? The woman briefly explains a process. Summarize the process by putting the events in order. When will the student be able to complete his registration? What will the student probably do immediately? Listen to part of a lecture in an architecture class. The professor is talking about an architectural style in North America.
Today I'd like to focus on the Prairie School of Architecture, which developed the foremost architectural style in North America in the first decades of the 20th century. The impetus for the movement can be found in the philosophy and practice of Louis Sullivan, who was also instrumental in the building of the first skyscrapers. Other important influences were the English arts and crafts movement and traditional Oriental themes. The students and followers of Sullivan, the most famous of whom was Frank Lloyd Wright, developed Sullivan's ideas into a quintessentially American style. expressing an underlying belief in the unity of man and nature. When many people think of architecture, they think of large public buildings. But most of the effort of the Prairie School was devoted to domestic buildings. The most visible external feature of this architecture was the predominance of horizontal lines and heavy projecting roofs. The shapes were designed to both harmonize with and reflect the broad, flat prairies of the Midwestern United States. The guiding principle behind the interior of these houses was an emphasis on reducing the number of separate rooms to a minimum, opening up living space, and designing internal divisions so that the light and vista created a sense of unity. The interior corners typical of traditional European houses were abolished to create a feeling of movement and freedom. This aesthetic ideal was an attempt to make the living space more compatible with human proportions and living requirements. In line with their belief in the importance of nature, these architects related the interiors to the surrounding landscape by their use of windows that were continuous ribbons of glass, of projecting terraces with parapets that were used as planting boxes, and of deeply cantilevered roof overhangs that led the eye towards the horizon. Often natural rocks formed a broad fireplace anchored at the center of the design. Ornamentation was only permitted to complement the overall expression of the building. To this end, the Prairie School architects tended to use simple, unmixed, natural materials, sometimes with geometric or oriental motifs. For example, many of the prairie houses had a turned-up roof edge, reminiscent of traditional Japanese houses.
What is the talk mainly about? What can be said about the nature of Prairie School architecture? Select the building that could be classified as an example of the Prairie School style. According to the professor, how did the Prairie School architect make living space more compatible with human needs? Why does the professor mention traditional Japanese houses? Listen to a talk given in a library science class. The professor is discussing how libraries acquire resources.
It is simply not feasible for every university library in the nation to contain all the books and journals that university students and faculty need for their research. To meet the needs of their users, libraries have made many innovations. While some money is used for the yearly purchasing of hardcover books and current journals that are recommended by professors, other funds are used to obtain materials that have been put on microfilm and microfiche. These techniques have proved extremely useful for adding informative materials to a library's collection at a low cost and without taking up much space. Most libraries now have computers that connect with other libraries. Professors and students can ask their librarian to use a computer search to find a library that has the material they need. The material is then ordered and checked out through this interlibrary loan system, which costs the user only a nominal shipping fee.
What is the main idea of the talk? What can be inferred from the talk? How do librarians decide what to purchase? According to the talk, what can students do if they can't find a book in the library? The professor briefly explains the steps that a library user would follow to obtain materials. Put the steps in order. Listen to part of a lecture given in an economics course. The professor is talking about micro-enterprises.
An enduring problem facing small-scale entrepreneurs in developing countries has been the difficulty in obtaining capital to start and run a business. A traditional route has been to borrow money from informal moneylenders who often attach exorbitant interest rates and thus reduce the net income of the borrower. This arrangement can trap a small-scale entrepreneur in a cycle of debt from which it is impossible to escape. An initiative pioneered in Bangladesh in 1983 by the Grameen Bank is an attempt to remedy this situation. The goal of this initiative was to help poor people escape from poverty by allowing them to borrow small amounts of money at reasonable interest rates without the necessity of providing collateral. The idea has now spread throughout much of the world and has been responsible for making significant inroads into both rural and urban poverty in developing countries. The founder of the Grameen Bank, an economics professor named Muhammad Yunus, understood that because of the risk and expense involved, traditional banks would not lend money to poor people who have no property to use as collateral. But he discovered that poor borrowers would maintain a good loan repayment rate if interest rates were realistically set and if certain other conditions were applied. These conditions included the use of peer group pressure to monitor the loans and guarantee repayment. The peer group typically consists of 5 borrowers linked together through the life of a loan. The group undergoes a training session and attends weekly meetings with a bank official. The members monitor how the money is used and scrutinize the business plan of their peers, because any one individual's chances of being awarded a loan are dependent on the repayment proficiency of every other member. This arrangement reduces costs for the bank and makes the borrowers manage their businesses well. Another important factor in the success of the scheme is that the loans tend to be short-term and small, averaging about $70. This minimizes the bank's risk and does not overwhelm the borrower. If the money is fully repaid after a year, then a further and larger loan may be awarded. The success of such schemes can be judged by the exceptionally high loan repayment rate and by the fact that a high percentage of borrowers have been able to work themselves out of poverty through the borrower's diligence and the support of the microloans.
What is the main topic of this lecture? The professor briefly explains a traditional cycle of borrowing. Put the steps of the cycle in order. According to the professor, why did Muhammad Yunus found the Grameen Bank? What problem facing small-scale entrepreneurs does the professor discuss? How can the success of the microenterprise scheme be judged? According to the professor, how is the Grameen Bank different from traditional banks? Who would be most likely to receive a loan from the Grameen Bank? Listen to a discussion in a physical education class. The participants are talking about jumping in sports.
The largest and strongest muscles in the body are in the hips, legs, and torso. These are the ones that give the most power to your total body movements. We have discussed the development of training methods for these muscles, especially those used for jumping. Many sports require a large repertoire of jumping skills. In such sports, players must respond in a variety of ways to different situations that occur in the course of the game or activity. For example, think about a volleyball player who may have to jump immediately after landing from a previous jump. Now, certain other sports require highly specialized types of jumping. Can you think of any particular sport in which a specialized type of jumping is required? Yes, Susan.
High jumping would require the same kind of jump to be repeated over and over.
So would a long jump. And what about a high dive? Would that be considered a kind of specific jump? I mean, a diver has to practice the same kind of movement in jumping off the board, right?
Yes, Bill, that's right. To perfect these sport-specific moves, an athlete has to repeat the motion literally thousands of times to ingrain its pattern into the subconscious memory of movement. This repetition strengthens the muscles so that the movement can be performed with less effort, more power, and often greater speed. Most athletes work their leg muscles hard in their fitness program, but they tend to neglect their arm muscles. Arms are at least as important as legs when it comes to carrying through a jumping motion. So why is it a mistake for athletes to neglect these muscles when training?
Well, one reason an athlete trains is to reduce the risk of injury by strengthening muscles, bones, joints, and connective tissue. I suppose this is just as important a consideration for the arms as it is for the legs.
Also, the motions of the arms can increase the effectiveness of a jump. So even though the arms aren't the actual muscles used in the jump, having strong arms could improve one's ability to perform the required sports skills.
What is the class discussion mainly about? Why does the professor bring up the topic of arm muscles in a discussion about jumping? The professor mentions volleyball as an example of which of the following? According to the professor, what can an athlete do to improve efficiency of movement? What is probably true about training methods to improve jumping in different sports? Based on the discussion, classify the training requirements for the sports that are illustrated.